evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that we hope will help improve your life. I'm Stu Reid. Here's my co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello, Stu. Is
Yes.
it true that they have a cure for sickle cell?
Well, it looks like they might be close. They got some trials going on. Pretty incredible stuff. Let me just give just a little bit of background. We've been hearing about sickle cell probably for 20 plus years, at least I have. But it was interesting just reading up and catching up again on, what is it? What is sickle cell disease? Apparently, 100,000 folks in the U.S. Are affected every year. 20 million people worldwide. Um, in the U.S., I'm not sure if it's true across the globe, but most of the folks affected are African American, and I think that may have something to do with the fact that after all these decades, we're just now creeping up on a possible cure. And let me just also mention, because I hadn't heard in a while some of the symptoms of sickle cell, Dave. I mean, if you don't really know what it is, you don't can't really put your hands on it. But this story talks about a young man who described his pain. He said this is Lendrick Holmes is the person that the story interviewed, and he talks about waking up with searing pain in his legs as though there were knives growing out of his bones. Sometimes it was in his arms like needles digging into his nerves. Other times it was in his chest. The air felt heavy and every breath burned as though there were barbed cage wire in around his lungs. I mean, that's just the pain that this guy in his young 20s at the time experienced sounds excruciating. Anyway, the FDA is gearing up to review to approve a gene therapy for sickle cell. Now, apparently, again, just a piece of background. What is sickle cell? It's a genetic disorder where misshaped or sickled red blood cells become stuck in the blood vessels and leading to the excruciating pain that we just talked about, organ failure, and early death. Apparently, sickle cell folks, on average, is in the U.S., die 2 decades earlier than the general population. So this is a pretty serious disease. Apparently, the previous treatments, Dave, have been bone marrow transplants, where they essentially use chemotherapy to wipe out a patient's existing bone marrow and then replace it with healthy bone marrow from a matched related donor.
Which is
Treatment has a
very
high
hard
cure.
to find.
It apparently has a high cure rate, but it's risky and burdensome and relies on finding a donor who can sometimes is impossible to find. But there's a new this new technique that is about to be approved by the FDA. Uses something called CRISPR gene editing technology to turn the production of healthy hemoglobin that we all make in patients. Now, Dave, I know some couple of years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, when it first came out, we talked about this CRISPR gene editing technology. But what is it?
Well, it's exactly that, gene editing. And over the last 5 or 10 years, they have found slews of ways it's probably going to cure hereditary diseases. Knocking out all your bone marrow, which leaves you totally vulnerable for infection, and you usually stay in the hospital for a month. They also use it against some of the leukemias, is very dangerous,
Mm-hmm.
very painful, and brutally expensive. Some of that will be changed with CRISPR. Essentially, what CRISPR does, and this is for work from California, is cut your genes in a particular point into which they can splice anything else, such as a gene to produce healthy hemoglobin and healthy red blood cells.
Mm-hmm.
And the article that we did this has Landrick Helms in a picture walking around happily because he's been free of sickle cell for several years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a reason you want to get the best doctor you can, because this isn't going to happen everywhere and it's not for everybody. So, as we've said, as we talk about all the medical issues that come up, you really, the science is remarkable, but to make sure that you get it and you get it done right, you want to get a good physician now in case you ever need one.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
You think
lucky.
this?
I've seen it because I started going to some very good people at Mount Sinai
Mm-hmm.
4 years ago. It's really made a difference for
Mm-hmm.
me.
You think this is covered by typical insurance, Dave? I mean, I imagine it must be crazy expensive.
Nah, just $1 million or two.
That's all. Huh?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
The cost of just the hospital stay is hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they have now, on some of the genetic diseases, cures. Price 1.5 million.
Jesus.
And they're not sure whether Medicaid is going to cover it. But of the people with sickle cell,
Mm-hmm.
if 10,000 of them got the treatment at $1 million a piece, you're talking $10 billion.
Mm.
And so that's going to be very hard to get covered.
Yeah. And meanwhile, there are 100,000 people a year in the US that get it. So
Yeah.
that's
It's good
crazy.
reasons not to get the treatment. And the article also had a young woman, who decided not to get the treatment.
Mm-hmm.
The treatment is very, very dangerous. Again, we know all the history of this stuff because it's just like leukemia. You have to knock out the total immune system with irradiating the bone marrow and throwing chemo at it. And a lot of people don't make it out the other end.
Yeah.
The
And
majority,
there's not a lot of empirical evidence as to how long the treatment lasts either, is there, Dave? Do we know?
the guess is it's going to last indefinitely,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but we can't know whether how long it's going to last because
It's brand
nobody
new.
has had
Yeah, how do
it
we know?
more
Yeah,
than 3 or 4 years.
yeah, yeah. Wow.
But that is a great breakthrough.
Yes,
You talk to
absolutely.
any doctor who's ever worked in an emergency room, and oh, do they see this problem?
Yeah. So let's hope folks figure out a way to make it more affordable. But I'm glad that the science is finally there. That's good news. Okay. So I have a question for you, Dave. Does MBS track every Saudi in the US every 11 minutes? That's a headline I saw somewhere. Does that really
Yeah,
happen?
almost definitely. We all know that your cell phone tracks you. It has
Mhm.
to be able to know where your phone is to connect a call to you.
Right.
What happens to that information? Well, it turns out it goes through clearinghouses to almost any phone company in the world that wants to ask. That if the cell phone company, literally in Cameroon, wants the information on a phone, they get it. It's an automatic thing, phone company to phone company.
Mm-hmm.
It's now clearly being used for surveillance around the world. And the Cameroon example is one. We don't know who's behind the Cameroonian interest there, and it's probably not just tracking Cameroonians to make sure they can connect their phone calls when they're in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, they have found that many phones from Saudis in the United States and there's probably hundreds of thousands at any time. A lot of students come here, are tracked and tested every 11 minutes and queried where you are. Who gets the information? Probably goes to the Saudi government. This is a Saudi phone company. Who owns the Saudi company? The government, led by MBS, a very slick, very powerful, unbelievably rich, murderous thug.
Mm.
But the notion that they can check everybody here, and probably the Chinese are able to do the same. I hadn't realized it was so extreme, but I know how the system works, and the story is accurate. The phone
Every
company,
11 minutes tracking, that's incredible, Dave. Every, I
yeah,
guess it's every Saudi citizen, or in terms of what you think about the Chinese, every Chinese citizen here in the US is tracked every 11 minutes.
well, they're being tracked already because the phone company has to know where they are to connect the phone to you.
Okay, well, the phone company knowing is
But
one
that
thing, but then
information is now available. What this was Citizen Lab looked at where the information was going.
there you go.
And as I say, so volumes going to places like Cameroon,
Mm-hmm.
who are presumably fronting for, I don't know whether it's the US, the Saudi,
Mm-hmm.
or the Russian security services.
Wow.
But that's one that's quite a story. And I'm in the field and I didn't realize just how bad it is.
That's
Now,
astounding.
speaking of what track, what about the smart home and the smart speakers? What are we finding out about that?
Well, a couple of things. That one, the whole with the smart home, you have the whole Internet of Things, which is starting to take off, where you have your smartphones, smart TVs, CCTV cameras, all kind of stuff in the house that is connected to these Internet of Things network. And apparently, these sensors can be tracked, are being tracked. And there's no regulation or little regulation over who gets that information. Now, the smart speakers, please, and that we all know about smart speakers. They've been around for a while. Where Alexa, do this. Alexa, turn the channel. Alexa, remind me this, that, and the other. Well, apparently, Amazon uses the smart speaker interaction data to resell it to their advertising community. This particular study found that there are 41 advertisers that sync or share cookies with Amazon, and the link to your personal information. And in turn, those 41 advertisers further sync their cookies with 247 other third parties, including advertising services. So you do the math on that, 41 times 247. You're talking about tens of thousands of advertisers, and who knows how many folks they are connected with. And all this information is out there being bought and sold by Amazon. And they don't tell you, you buy your smart speakers, it's not disclosed that they are profiling you for targeted advertising. So you're talking about millions of people now that are being targeted and tracked with their smart speakers, with the Internet of Things, technology that is getting embedded in more and more devices in the home. And as the so-called smart homes become more so and more devices become connected to the net, there's going to be just more and more personal data that's out there. And I haven't heard of any legislation. I haven't heard of any initiatives to curtail this, to even require any reporting on this information, Dave. It's an incredible amount of data. And Amazon, we all know how huge and monstrous they are, just in terms of their size, their breadth, their reach. And there's just no control whatsoever or even monitoring of what they do, except various watchdogs and studies that go out and take a look at this stuff. If it weren't for them, we wouldn't even know this stuff. And just that we know it doesn't help defend us against, this kind of intrusion. Now, a couple of reporters, one of the reporters talked about a number of things that you could possibly do to help give you some kind of arm's length distance between you and Amazon. And one of those things is to turn off, go into your Google settings and
let me pull that into the next story.
Okay, yeah. Okay, go ahead.
It's the Amazon and the Google. How much time do we have for a story now?
We've got about 5 minutes to the next break, to the halftime break, 5 or 10. So go ahead.
Okay, 5 minutes means we can bring in the geofence story.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had people on the air explaining this to us before.
Yes, we have.
Legislature. What's the geofence involved? How many innocent people are investigated every day?
It looks like thousands, Dave. Geofence, just to remind our listeners and viewers, is a technology where essentially Google can go into their database and define a geographic quadrant, I should say, and identify all of the phones that are in that geographic area at any given time and space. And what's happening is that law enforcement has started to send warrants, apparently thousands of warrants to Google to gather this data. Began in, well, I'm not sure if it began in 2018, but there's data about it since 2018. In 2018, there are 982 geofence warrants that Google received. A year later, they almost increased exponentially to 8,400. And then in 2020, increased to almost 12,000 geofence warrants. And the warrant, there could be hundreds or thousands of people within a given geographic area that are targeted by one particular geofence warrant.
Do one on Grand Central Station.
Yeah.
And maybe you would be right to do it if somebody set up a bomb and killed 100 people in Grand Central Station. But they're doing it on everything now.
Yeah.
Tens of thousands.
And I just want to quote Albert Fox-Khan, who's been on our show a number of times, as well as other staff from the STOP, the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project based here in New York City. And Albert Fox-Khan, who is the executive director, I'm quoting from him, he says, geofence warrants are unconstitutionally broad and invasive. And he looks forward to the day that they'll be completely outlawed. There's very little, judges seem to approve these things with very little justification from law enforcement. And over 12,000 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I wonder what the number is today. I don't have the stats on it, but very broad, very
what can somebody do to protect themselves?
Turn off the location settings on their phone. There's activity control. If you go into the Google data on your phone, activity controls, click turn off in the web and web activity section. It also helps that when you are searching the web, log out of your Google account. Don't be logged into your Google account when you're searching the web, because that's another way that Google is able to track you. Google is the real behemoth here that is globally tracking folks across the planet. Is there anything else, Dave? I mean,
if we were going to take the break, when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about how Google got that ability to track almost every American.
That's an interesting story.
We're going to talk about AI in medicine and how it's not always working, and a whole lot of other stories and one that's just in the news. As we went to record this on Tuesday, I looked at the news, and things are happening in Gaza that we can explain some of the technology that's making them happen. In the news, half an hour before we tape this on Tuesday.
Okay. Well, something to look forward to. This is Community Technology on WHCR 90.3 FM. Dave Burstein and Stu Reid. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after a brief musical break.
Autumn in New York, why does it seem so inviting? Autumn in New York, it spells the thrill of first nighting. Glittering crowds and shimmering clouds in canyons of steel, they're making me feel I'm home. It's autumn in New York that brings the promise of new love. Autumn in New York is often mingled with pain. Dreamers with empty hands may sigh for exotic lands. It's autumn in New York. It's good to live it again.
Autumn in New York, the gleaming rooftops at sundown. Oh, autumn in New York, it lifts you up when you run down. Yes, jaded ruins and gay divorces who lunch at the Ritz will tell you that it's divine. This autumn in New York transforms the slums into Mayfair. Oh, autumn in New York, you'll need the castles in Spain. Yes, lovers that bless the dark. Oh, on the benches in Central Park. Great autumn in New York. It's good to live it again.
that brings the promise of new love. Autumn in New York is often mingled with pain. Dreamers with empty hands may sigh for exotic lands. It's autumn in New York. It's good to live it
Okay, we're back. Community and Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid. Now, Dave, we're taping the show on Tuesday, the day before airing, and there's a story that the New York Times and Washington Post is reporting today about hundreds injured and dozens killed in recent bombings, today, I guess, bombings in refugee camps in Gaza. And the Israelis are saying that they are targeting Hamas leaders that they know are there. How is this happening? How is this possible, Dave?
The
Or is
surveillance,
it possible?
well, surveillance is happening in Gaza is probably more intense than is happening in China, and is a whole world away from what's happening here in New York. Not that we don't have a whole lot of surveillance in New York that we should be doing something about. The Israelis control the phone networks in Gaza. They do that. They shut them all down, including those nominally owned by the Palestinians, so that nobody in Gaza can get the word out about what's going on. That has lots of history. Gaza, until just recently, didn't even have 4G phones, the kinds that you use to look at your YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
The Israelis didn't allow them anything other than very slow connections, not good enough for video in most places, much less 5G. But we know about that control. Now, if you know where somebody's phone is, and we talked earlier in the show about how the Saudis are tracking probably almost all the Saudis in the United States every 11 minutes, you can pretty much figure out where the cell phone is, and usually that's on a person.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's quite possible that they identified someone. How did they identify them? Well, beside all the spying that's going on, the Israelis send drones over Palestine regularly, many of them, that have face recognition capability. So they're flying, say, over the refugee camp, a drone, taking pictures of everybody there and identifying who was in the picture. So if they figure that where there was a well, they actually could probably trace the people coming back from the raids into Israel that killed so many and took the hostages. And then once they've got the face in the system and know who they're tracking, total surveillance on what's going on there. In many cases, because you're working with the electronic signals and phones, even if people are in underground tunnels, the Israelis know where they are.
Mm.
This is a technology show. It's not our place to tell you what we think about Palestine and Israel. You can guess our personal opinions, but we can definitely explain how it's done, and that's where our expertise is.
Mm-hmm.
Stu, ask me the medical question. The AI.
Well, there's been a lot of talk earlier in the show. We were talking about sickle cell and then finding a new gene therapy. I don't know if AI played any role in that, but I've been hearing a lot that AI is playing a role in medical research and medical treatment. What's the latest in that area, Dave?
Medicine is both massively going into AI and desperately avoiding it. Massively going into AI in a group of a few thousand radiologists, 30% are using AI. I had no idea it was this high, although I was very happy to see the AI. I had to go in for an MRI a year and a half ago. Got the report from the radiologist, and at the bottom of it, there was a note from the AI at Mount Sinai. It was very simple. There was 2 pages of notes from the radiologist. The AI just said, I agree. And in fact, AIs are doing diagnoses that sometimes are missed by radiologists. There's over 500 pieces of software, all calling themselves AI, which there's no real definition of, actually in use by physicians in the US and Europe already. There's no regulation on it. Now, how good is it? And I've been doing a lot of such in Riyadh. A powerful article from the Times begins, in medicine, the cautionary tales about the unintended effects of artificial intelligence are already legendary. And it goes on to talk about things that were touted as breakthroughs and aren't. Most of them have been tested on fewer than 500 cases. Not likely to be statistically relevant unless
that's a pretty small sample.
Effect.
And we've talked a lot, Dave, about how AI can only learn from what you feed it, and if those 500 samples are not a diverse population and don't include folks of all character and persuasions and ethnicity and age and demographically diverse, you're going to get a skewed intelligence out of that system.
Yeah. Think, for example, of women in breast cancer. There's excellent work being done out of Boston in reading mammographies that's at least as good as a radiologist. When you're in the right hospital in Boston that's part of the university, whether it's going to be true when it gets out into the field, we don't know yet. But think of a young woman, say 25, who has breast cancer. In many ways, since very few people get breast cancer under 40, somebody who gets it at 25 is going to be atypical, needs the doctor to consider something different, and needs the AI, if it's to be useful and not make mistakes and recommend the wrong treatment, to have been tested on some 25-year-old women, enough to have a conclusion on what's going on. This, by and large, is not happening. It's being jumped into, and people like Eric Topol, one of the most respected physicians in America, has jumped hard into AI, talking about the incredible things that will be happening. But it's also absolutely clear there's so much money to be made and so much hype and so much enthusiasm. And some of the people believe in things that the data just can't back up.
Yeah.
Stu, I just heard a few days ago that Google spends $30 billion to control your browser. What's happening there?
I saw that story, Dave. That is astounding to me that Google is paying $30 billion to various entities to make sure that when you are on the internet and browsing, that you go to Google search. I mean, $30 billion, Dave, that's a lot of money. Historically, I've thought, because you and I were around when there was no Google. So we saw Google be born and get out there. And, my sense was that, oh, they have really good algorithms and they're probably emerged as the best search engine out there. But then we hear that they are paying 30 billion. I'm not even sure who that money is going to, Dave. Is that going to
I can give you part of that answer.
okay, well
Apparently $8 billion a year goes to Apple to make Google the default browser in the 55% of American phones that are made by Apple.
Wow.
Google is also paying people, I don't know this particular example is true, but it probably is, at Telecom Italia to make sure everybody in Italy sees Google first to search on.
So it's the actual devices and the software on the devices. When I say device, I mean cell phones, mobile devices, tablets that have a default browser built into them. That's where the money's going.
More than that, it's whatever browser it has. It's the search engine where Google makes its money. So you could, for example, take Google's Android software and put something with much better privacy control, like DuckDuckGo, which actually is a name of a search engine that has a lot of privacy, on every phone in the United Kingdom, because you don't want the American company to know everything about that phone, who's that phone owner is looking for. Google wants to make sure that you go to Google for search, and the numbers are incredible. They have over 90% of the searches in most of the United States and Europe, Japan, probably Australia, and even a huge percentage in places like India and Vietnam and South Africa. Google dominates like very few other companies dominate anything. And they make sure that they can't get a competitor because it can't. Most people don't change the default search engine. Very few people actually change that. So if Google is the default, it will be something between hard and impossible for Opera, another browser, for example.
Yeah, I remember that from many years ago.
Opera is still there now.
Are they? Yeah, I remember them.
Yeah, and it's actually a very nice browser. I use it sometimes. It came out of Scandinavia. Couldn't make a living, even though it was very good and had some important advantages over Google.
Yeah, I've also used DuckDuckGo. That was a browser that our previous co-host, Lena Marvin, who used to be a co-host on this show, turned me on to probably 5-6 years ago as another browser that has much more protection for the user for their privacy. D-U-C-K, go, DuckDuckGo.
You don't use DuckDuckGo, or very few people use DuckDuckGo. Google is paying the people who put out the phones, Apple, the phone companies, $30 billion a year.
Wow.
We found out in the antitrust trial against Google.
Wow. So that is, I mean, they pay for their monopoly. They have bought their monopoly.
Yeah, it happens. Google is a very good search engine. I remember when it first came out, and it was so much better than anything else. Everybody I knew switched within a year or so. Now, Bing is finally getting a little share from Google, but for many years, Bing or DuckDuckGo or Opera was pretty much as good as Google. Not quite if you needed to be sure you're getting the right results. Google really was excellent, but the difference didn't affect many people.
Wow.
Now, we are being set. One of the big stories this week is, can AI be brought under control? And tomorrow, well, I'm typing on Tuesday. You're going to hear this on Wednesday. On Wednesday and Thursday in France, the Prime Minister of England, Sunak, has convened a summit on how to regulate and control AI. The Vice President of the United States is going to be there.
Mhm.
There are numerous senior people from many countries. Uh, the
And
one of
Dave,
the ministers,
didn't President Biden just issue an executive order around AI?
we'll get there.
Okay.
Okay. And they have senior people, including Elon Musk, and they haven't told you who all, but they're senior people, possibly the CEOs of Apple and Microsoft and OpenAI and Anthropic in England for this summit. The first day is a general discussion. The second day is going to be closed, and they're going to try to come up with proposals for how to regulate AI, decided by the government representatives, led by the company representatives.
That's gonna be interesting, Dave. I don't see how anything can come out of that is gonna work, but maybe I'm a little cynical. I know I'm a little
Well,
cynical.
actually, a whole lot came out on Monday
Hmm.
when the United States put out 100 pages of regulations on AI. A lot. It turns out that ultimately it's worthless on a lot of big questions,
Hmm.
but there's a whole lot of decent stuff that each of the big AI.
Yeah, Dave, you just dropped out. Your audio just dropped out for some reason, Dave. Okay.
Second call coming
So you
in.
said it's reasonably hopeful, Dave?
Yeah, reasonably helpful. For example, they have to test their systems to see what bias it has. And on the show, we've talked about the bias in AI systems a whole lot. And they are forbidden from putting biased samples out, biased information, doing intrusive control of the rental market, which is very big, and a lot of consumer protection. In the study, in the 100 pages, it says everything has to have a watermark on it of some sort so that you can tell whether that picture was made by AI or not. And you can look at what's reading and see maybe whether it was written by a computer or by a human being. It probably won't work against somebody who wants to get around it. But lots of good, sensible stuff that they can agree on, these people, because they're a good thing to do. It lets the government say, like Joe Biden did, who said, we have a bold new initiative to control AI. And every government wants to say they're doing something because we all know this is an important thing that's going to affect everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And the big companies are delighted to go along with most of it, partly because some of the really abusive stuff they aren't going to do at Google and Microsoft, partly because if you have all these rules that make it much harder and more expensive to jump into the game with your model. I know 16 large models.
That helps eliminate the competition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Columbia professor who had so much effect on the antitrust policy did a piece about it 2 weeks ago. And everybody in the industry, including some of the top scientists, are pointing out that these restrictions definitely will hurt the small companies much more than the big companies.
Yeah.
On the other hand, some of the things that you want, we've been talking on the show about how they're tracking us. Basic privacy guards are not in the US regulations and probably won't be in anything that comes out of this big international meeting in China.
Wow.
So now in the international meeting, the Chinese did something that's necessary and the Americans didn't. Right now, China has, for all practical purposes, caught up with the United States. Something like 40% of all the papers in AI by one count is coming out of China. Yesterday, I read 3 papers from Tsinghua, the engineering university comparable to MIT in Beijing, about AI that was strong, important papers. They have 6 large language models that in many ways are comparable to ChatGPT and Google's Bard. Chinese are at least a quarter of internet users in general. By another count, they're almost 40%. And of course, what's happening with the internet, and particularly with AI, it goes all around the world.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous to think you can make rules on the big things, like the guardrails being effective on the large models that could in fact be turned into the killer robots that we're all afraid of. Probably won't, but some very serious people believe that they will. Or might, not will, might.
Yeah, yeah. And you've got such huge amounts of dollars driving the industry. I mean, they're not going to slow down. I mean, they might make some turns and twists and as you say, some guardrails, but I don't see how there's going to be any fundamental change in the direction where they're going. But Dave, we're just about out of time, so give me a wrap up. What's your final thoughts on AI and where we are? We talked about a lot. The eavesdropping, the privacy, and the geofencing, and I know AI is going to be playing into all this stuff. Any final thoughts?
It's going to change the world. It's going to do a lot of good things. It's going to allow you to do 10 times as many mammographies in a place like Nigeria or any other country that can't afford the cost of mammographies and radiologists. There are countries with only one, in Africa, with only a single radiologist in the country. Now, AI is doing a good job reading mammographies. Harvard professor who happened to have breast cancer, when she recovered, went to work at making sure that the mammography reading was excellent and tested properly, and it really looks good. So if you're in Cameroon, where you have a few technicians and possibly only one radiologist for the whole country, you can take a lot of mammographies. And now you could read them, which would have been impossible because they didn't have enough radiologists almost anywhere in Africa. Example after example. There are 2 drugs now in clinical trials that were created by AI, and literally hundreds being tested in the labs. It looks that promising.
Okay, so there's good news there.
There's
Potentially.
a lot of good news. No, it's already starting to happen. It's not potentially. There are going to be great things happening, and dangerous things happening, which is why it is so important that the people who care stay on top of it. How real is the danger? Well, 3 of the most important scientists in artificial intelligence, Turing Award winners, got 23 other peers, the top scientists in AI, to put out. It came out of Montreal and Toronto, where several of these people were based. A proposal on how to protect people from the dangers of AI. Their suggestion is that every company making these large language models, and when we're talking about OpenAI, they've raised $12 billion. Anthropic has raised $5 billion. Microsoft and Google don't have to raise the money. They have all the money in the world, trillions. Should take a third of the money they are spending on AI and put it to work in AI safety.
Okay. Okay, Dave, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. A fascinating topic. I particularly want to explore further, and I'm sure we will, AI safety and the guardrails and how that's progressing down the road.
They're not going to work.
Okay. Okay, this has been Community and Technology on WACR 90.3 FM. Every Wednesday, 5 p.m. Tune in. Just might learn something. Thanks. Good night.